I, from a young age, was very much trying to build products and startups. And I knew kind of in the back of my head that a lot of good projects start as side projects or hobbies. I definitely kind of had a thesis, which was like, just like software, I need to get into the market very quickly. I need to ship product very quickly.
Generally, you know, when you talk about hardware, especially like early stage hardware startups, you really don't think about making money or being profitable in the first year. You usually don't hear about it either, but you have some very interesting numbers that you generally don't see, kind of like in the hardware space. And so then you were charging $800 to $1,500. How many did you sell in the first batch?
50.
50.
Yeah.
So you had like 50K of revenue coming in straight in the first few months.
That was just in a couple weeks.
Just a couple weeks.
Just a couple weeks. I emailed some folks and said, hey, if I made this, would you put it on your channel? Right. And once I got the go ahead, I made the prototype in like 2 weeks, just barely had it working, like really MVP. They put it on their site. And that's how we got the first pre-orders.
First hardware podcast or first hardware founder of season 3.
Nice.
So Dylan, you're the founder of Evergreen. What is Evergreen?
So Evergreen creates devices that help people make money from their hardware. We started with a crypto mining device that uses hard drives. And so people just plug it in and they just start making money.
And generally, you know, when you talk about hardware, especially like early stage hardware startups, you really don't think about making money or being profitable in the first year. You usually don't hear about it either, but you have some very interesting numbers that you generally don't see, kind of like in the hardware space. You did something like $1 million in like your first year or two. So what was the story of kind of how you got started?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been doing hardware for a long time, and most of the stories with hardware is you just get stuck on, you know, development. And even once you have a prototype, it can then take a couple $100K to get it into production. So after doing this for years and working at companies too, and just seeing like how much money they had to invest before even getting out into the market, I definitely kind of had a thesis, which was like, just like software, I need to get into the market very quickly. I need to ship product very quickly. And the way that I did that was using off-the-shelf components and 3D printing. So specifically in this business, from the time that I kind of came up with this idea and validated it, and before I even built it, I validated I could distribute it. I emailed some folks and said, hey, if I made this, would you put it on your channel? Right. And once I got the go ahead, I made the prototype in like 2 weeks, just barely had it working, like really MVP. They put it on their site, and that's how we got the first pre-orders. Right.
What was the functionality of the first prototype?
So again, it's really nice kind of in crypto mining that it just has to make money, right? You don't have to build that much features. You just have to be able to monitor it, right? So the first device was a Raspberry Pi and a hard drive. Plug it into the wall. It just has some LEDs on it. And at the time, it didn't even have a mobile app. You would just go to like a little web page and it would say like, you're earning money. And in crypto, you know you're earning money because the money comes into your wallet. If it doesn't come into your wallet, you know you've probably got the wrong thing or it's not working.
Interesting. And so what was the process of reaching out to these people? Was it like YouTube channels or like websites?
Yeah, well, so, I from a young age was very much trying to build products and startups. And I knew kind of in the back of my head that a lot of good projects start as side projects or hobbies, right? And so at the time, I kind of shut my brain off. I actually swore to myself, I'm not doing another startup, but I wanted to make some money. And so I got into crypto mining just as a way for me to make money. So how did I get into it? Well, I went through like the user journey, the customer journey. I, went on YouTube, learned about it, bought my parts. I was in, 5 different Discords, et cetera. So it was very easy for me after doing that for, 2 months. I knew who the players were that influenced this market because they were the ones who, everybody talked about, hey, I learned this from this guy, I learned this from that guy. So then for me to turn around and reach out to those guys and say, hey, I'm a part of your community. You taught me how to do these things. Is this something that you would be interested in, right? That was the easiest way to do it versus like what I had done in the past was like, hey, like try the thing I've been trying to invent for the last year, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people try to start startups for the sake of starting startups, and they usually run out of money because they don't have some unique insight or they're trying to like steal someone else's idea or whatever. But you kind of had the community aspect down. You clearly weren't like an outsider. You probably knew how to speak the language properly. And so then that got you your first, I guess, placements on these channels.
Yeah. So he like posted the video, and he was honest with the community. Hey, this is a new, company. The first thing was, hey, everybody go join the Discord. And I got a couple hundred people in the Discord. And from there it was, hey guys, I have, a limited batch of 50. I'm gonna, sign up here and I will select you to get the prototype.
Gotcha. And how much were you selling the first prototype for?
We had 2 versions, $7.99 and like $14.99.
Okay. So $800, $1,500. And when you were selling it to these people, what was the promise? Just that they would be able to plug it into their wall and make money?
Yeah. So this specific market, like a lot of these guys like just want to try different things.
Gotcha.
And for me, and the reason why I had gone into hard drives is because a lot of these folks are like running out of energy, or like I kind of say like as a joke, like the wife test, right? Like, is your wife going to be pissed at you for like putting this in the garage? So like that, you know, as somebody who that happened to me, it wasn't my wife, it was my dad. He was like, why are you running this? Like, get this out of my house. I knew I had something that passed the test, right? So the impetus for buying this product in particular versus buying any other product in the market was it's low power, you know, it's on a new network, and people relatively had, you know, faith that the network was, you know, something they would want it to be a part of.
And so then you were charging $800 to $1,500. How many did you sell in the first batch?
50.
50.
Yeah.
So you had like 50K of revenue coming in straight in the first few months.
That was just in a couple weeks.
Just a couple weeks.
Just a couple weeks, yeah.
Interesting. Then what did you do after that?
I had to build them, right? So
because you sold it like off a landing page, basically.
off a prototype, one single
off a
prototype. That took me 2 weeks to make.
Gotcha.
Right, because that was someone committed and said, "Hey, can you get me a prototype?" I said, "Yes." It took me about 2 weeks.
And then what happens next? So you have this prototype, bunch of sales.
Yeah, so I had to build them, right? And so at the time it was just me. I had the 50,000, you know, that I sold it for, and I was trying to sell it at a competitive margin, so there really wasn't much on the table. But I, you know, I grinded. I got all the parts. The way that these devices work is they actually have to sit in like kind of a server for, you know, a day or two. And at the time, the software was very not good at all. I was using off the shelf. Yeah.
How long ago was this?
About 2 years ago.
Okay.
So this was right around the time I moved to Daly City. So in this hacker house that I was in called Edify, I like took over the living room with a couple of my PCs that just had hard drives connected to them like 24/7. And then in the basement, I had my 3D printer, and I had my sander and my little glue assembly, right? I'm super gluing them. So it took me like, you know, 5 months to put all these things together. And in that time, not only did I have to actually build them, but the software was like rapidly changing, right? I had to keep updating the software, and very lucky that I had experience building devices with, you know, OTA updates and the ability to actually still work with the devices once they've left the house. I warn all hardware founders, like, do not ship products without the ability, especially early on, the ability to update them or even like shell into them, right? Even go on and actually be able to do stuff, because I had to swap out the whole software stack mid-flight because, you know, the network conditions changed, or there was an update or this or that, as it, you know, kind of happens in software. And if I didn't have the ability to update, all those devices would have been dead. And I kid you not, there are devices, these V1s in this old 3D printed box that are still running.
Interesting.
And we shifted out the software, so people reached out, "Hey, I'm not getting updates." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I can help you, you know, reflash your SD card and get on our new system."
Interesting. And then how long? So that was about 5 months, and then you had like the second batch of like the V2 prototype.
Yeah, the V2, that was, you know, more than just designing a new device. It went from me to building out a team. So I found other folks in the space who believed in what I was doing, who had complementary skill sets. And I grinded myself. This was a time when actually I was learning and teaching myself software beyond what I had already did, because I was very much a hardware guy. I started working with manufacturers, but I also started developing like the mobile application. And so I was able to meet some folks who, you know, took my initial operating system, turned it into a much better operating system, really productionalized everything that I was doing. So that took like, you know, 7-8 months. Got a little bit of funding to have like the developers on board. And then as we were running out of funding, we were like, all right, well, now or never, we got to launch it. And we were still 3D printing at the time. And we barely set up like a little assembly line in the garage. And about, you know, October of you know, last year, so whatever, a little over a year ago, that's when I started to do the same strategy, but I was a lot more calculated. So I didn't just kind of give the device to any YouTuber who said they would want me to have it. I started very calculated with like a YouTuber with 1,000 subscribers. And then I went to the YouTuber with 10,000 subscribers.
Started with the lower subscribers.
Yeah.
Why?
This niche, they know each other, right? Everybody knows everybody in this niche.
That makes sense.
So to build that hype iteratively was a lot more powerful, because what ended up happening is the bigger guys then were reaching out to me, right? Because they wanted to be a part of this hype. And I created the FOMO for the distribution channel, not just, hey, begging, hey, please, you know, do my thing.
And then you can charge better rates on like, you know, you don't get like, I guess, rugged by getting overcharged by some of these bigger YouTubers. They actually wanted to kind of have your product.
Correct. Yeah.
How did that work from a conversion perspective?
So in terms of conversion perspective, in terms of like cost or?
So you were putting these kind of like products onto these YouTube channels, and people, it worked the first time around. You got 50K in revenue off of these guys. The second time around with the new prototype, how is it working out?
Yeah, so the first, like, let's say we sent it out to 3 YouTubers, you know, the most that these YouTubers had were maybe 50,000 subscribers, but we were able to start getting our numbers back up to what I had done before, 40,000, 50,000 a month, you know. So October was like, you know, 50,000, November was 70,000, December was 80,000, right? Kind of just growing iteratively. And then by January, after we got picked up by like the 2 biggest folks in the space, that's when things really just cranked up and we were able to do, you know, 300-400K in a month.
300-400K in a month.
Yeah, it was wild.
Interesting. And all it was just iteratively moving to larger and larger YouTubers.
Yes. And the price of the coin went up as well because we were getting more exposure on it.
Oh, so you had a speculative asset along with it?
Well, so we're operating not on a network that I built, but right, you're mining a token on another network.
Gotcha.
So like when we started in October, November, December, the token was at $30. And mind you, this was 2 months after FTX had collapsed.
Interesting.
Right. So this was like, for all intents and purposes, the market should have been totally washed out.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually in our favor because think about what happened. It was centralized exchanges where you own nothing. You have no control. Of course, you're going to start to want to put your money into a real hard asset where you're the producer, you're the provider, instead of on the other end of that chain where you have no control. But long story short, by January, and you can see the price, it's called Chia XCH, it goes from 30 to 45. And at the time, I wasn't sure if it was because of our exposure, but over the last year, I've watched this happen to other coins where, you know, they're the hot mining coin that month and the price goes way up. And that creates a flywheel of sorts. But it can also be pretty dangerous because you get way too many people coming in and then the price crashes and everybody's disappointed. And, you know, just because it got a lot of attention on YouTube doesn't actually warrant like any fundamental reason why it should go up. But that definitely played to our advantage because people started to feel the FOMO.
How are you fulfilling all of these orders coming in? Because it sounds like you were in a living room with like a few guys like that were developers.
Yeah. So at the time we had like half a server rack, right? Because these hard drives need an associated server rack to actually work for the network. And that was like part of our critical advantage is like all of our customers were not going to buy their own server rack. So we did that as the service, right? That was like part of why we were really popular is because instead of having to go out and buy like all this equipment just to have your farm, we would just give you the farm. So at the time we had like half a server rack. We had a couple tables in the garage. Very quickly, I had to start buying a ton of parts, finding many different suppliers, running out suppliers of their supply, right? Like I would order the screws on Amazon, order as many as I could, and then they'd be out. I was still using a lot of like secondhand or off the shelf parts. And so, yeah, the scale up was very painful. It took, we probably iterated on the production line in the garage like 20 times until we got it right. And it was even small stuff like the orientation of the table. Because if you put the tables too close together, people start bumping into each other, they drop stuff, whatever. But then the bigger task was taking that half server rack and turning it into like 4 full server racks. And if you've ever run a server rack, they get pretty hot.
What goes into building a server rack?
Yeah, so you build the frame. You got to know how to build servers. You got to, get the server, we had GPUs, we had RAM, et cetera. So that was a little easier for us to source the server components. It was more designing the actual room, getting enough power into that room. And we're in California, we pay crazy energy rates. We had to run new power lines into the room. We had to put a 60,000 BTU air conditioner, right? And there's barely any room to walk around. And then even once it was done, I had to build a bunch of software to monitor. There was 35 servers in this room. And I got so tired of asking, the people working in the server room, hey, what's the status of this? What's the status of that? And one day they were out for a week and I had to step in and do that job. And by the way, I did everything before I would have somebody else do it to find all the inefficiencies and just to do it. And so I'm doing their job for a week and I'm like, man, this is so inefficient. And so that was kind of another, big jump for me in my journey was, I actually had an application to build. So I had these software skills and then I was like, well, now I actually have like a reason to build it. So I just very rapidly built this tool that, once that was done, I never had to ask that question again, right? It was great.